We back. It's literally life or death right now in here. It's so warm. The air quality index is 132 right now. Yeah, which is not good. Like I could smell the smoke. I had to open the window, but I can like literally smell the smoke. So if I die, it was great knowing y'all. All right. I'll post something up. Man, it's smoky. Fuck. Let's go spy. Do a little QQQ post. What else? Dow. Why not?
Oh, you just did?
I'm about to.
Oh, I can. I got a little message.
XL.
Put out.
We'll do two of them. What are your tickers?
I'll do spy and QQQ.
Spy and QQQ. All right. I'll do Dow, SPXL, XPSS. Maybe a little Home Depot just cause. Talk about wood and all that stuff. S Dow. What's the other one I'm missing? SQQQ. You share your screen whenever. I'll swap this over.
Well, where we start?
Not ready. Not ready. But
I'll just
make
share
this
the
out.
screen for now. So I don't know what else to share.
That's fine. That works. Move it over so people could see our faces too. Crypto screen. So the crypto markets down. A little slow tonight. Where everybody at?
Frothy. Talk about frothy, bro. NFTs are going berserkers lately.
Yeah.
Have you heard about these things? Things are going up like.
Yeah.
Somebody bought something for 500 and they sold it for 40K the next week. Like, it's going. The NFTs are going insane once again. They slowed down and now they're crazy again.
Yeah. It's redonkulous.
It's pretty crazy.
Alright, put that one up.
You ready?
I'm ready when you're ready. I'm gonna pump up my other computer.
Well, we'll kick it off. Welcome everyone to Stock Talk Games Real Talk Podcast, live podcast.
Live.
Do this later on or right now. It's gonna be posted on Facebook, YouTube, so you can come back and watch it later. Or if you're watching it now, later. If you're watching it later now, as in the future, thanks for stopping by. But yeah, we cover everything happening in the stock market and the economy, give you our insights and our thoughts. And when you get to join us live, you get to chat with us about what's going on. So we want it to be interactive. That's why we set it up this way. So let's jump into things. Where do we want to start out this week?
Kick us off. Consumerism. Looks like people aren't too happy. Consumerism. Looks like people don't feel too good about the market.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we talked about. Let me change my screen real quick. We talked about margin debt. I think it was probably like a month ago or something. How margin debt was going insane. It was just like skyrocketing to the up and to the right, kind of like the S&P. And last month we saw margin debt come down for the first time since 2018. So 2018 we hit a peak, We saw some volatility in the market, and then we saw it go lower during the COVID crash, and it's just been skyrocketing since the bottom of COVID back in March 2020, and it's just been on a tear. Along with that, the S&P 500, the market in general has been on a tear, and so oftentimes people like to show the correlation between this. Bring up my camera a little bit. People often kind of put the correlation between margin debt and the markets, and so here's a chart I'm showing you guys. Let me blow this up quick a little bit more. That's what I wanted. Where'd my chart go? Where'd you go, Mr. Chart? Oh, here we go. But yeah, so I would say there's a really loose correlation between the stock market and margin debt. So if you don't know what margin debt is, it's basically the amount of debt people take on to invest. And so it's like margin trading. If you've never heard of margin trading, say you have $1,000 in an account, some brokers will let you, trade up to 10K. That's
of
not
debt.
Yours, but you're putting you're using that money to gain larger exposure in the markets and hopefully make money. And so if we look at this chart, basically 2000, a little bit before 2000, margin debt has been on a tear, and it's just because more retail investors, more people getting into the markets. It's easier to invest now, and it's just been there's ups and downs, but basically up and to the right since right before the dot-com bubble. And so kind of the loose correlation we see is we often see margin debt go these really steep increases, and then when we see a pullback, it usually coincides with a pullback in the market. So kind of when we look at this chart, there's two things I want to look at. So we can use a 2000 and a 2007 as an example. So these are times where it went up and rocketed, it came down, it sizzled sideways a little bit, and then margin debt, along with the markets, just crashed. So that's one scenario that happens. Another scenario we can look at like 2018. So 2018 we saw a peak, and then we just kind of saw the market go sideways. We saw margin debt did come back a decent amount, and there was a little pullback in the market, but even though it pulled back, the market was still going up. So that's why I say there's a loose correlation. It's not always 1-to-1, but this is something we've kind of talked about in the podcast over the last month, and something to pay attention to, because we need to see what happens moving forward. Have we hit a peak in margin debt and larger pullbacks in margin debt is coming, kind of like we saw in 2000 and 2007, or is this just a little pullback because things have gotten too hot? The market might cool off a little bit in how aggressively it moves to the upside and then we move sideways. But this is just something we just want to really keep an eye on, because it could be, I wouldn't say a leading indicator, but it's something that could impact the markets.
Yeah, I'm actually going to put up something as well. I don't do margin calls. Do you? Out of curiosity? No. A little too risky. We talked about this one a while back. And so this is about Bitcoin traders going 100-to-1 and leveraging debt.
Same.
So just thought that was kind of I wouldn't say a funny figure, but definitely something that has some profound consequences in the market if, as we're going in and out. And the consumer sentiment that falls, as it's stated here, that goes along with that, is definitely of concern.
Yeah, and that's another point I bring up is kind of like we've been talking about this for a while, talking about growth has picked up substantially, growth is slowing. Another thing is we saw margin debt, pull back a little bit. 1 month doesn't tell us much, but it's just something you need to pay attention to. The reason I want to bring this up is because I've been seeing people talk about this everywhere, but they're not giving you full context around what it means. It doesn't mean the market's crashing, everybody. That's not what it means. It's just something we need to keep our eye on to see if there's more downside in margin debt, or if we're just taking a break and maybe it's going to go even higher. It's just something to pay attention to. And you just bring up the article right there, and I'll bring it up on my side a little bit bigger, but this is just kind of an opinion I thought was really important, is margin debt doesn't mean that a bear market's coming. That's not, the correlation's not there at all. We see somewhat of a relationship, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen. And this guy brings up some good points in this article, but the main thing I want to bring up is this chart. So this is borrowing to buy stocks. And so what this chart kind of shows is that basically this even though we see pullbacks in margin debt, we really look at this, margin debt really isn't slowing down. So this chart is saying that we're in the negative which means the average person's investor is negative credit balance.
Oof.
Basically means that borrowing to invest in the market really has never slowed down. It actually peaked in 2009, which means in 2009, net people had, what is this, $100 billion in their investing accounts. But since then, we've been on a downturn. And we saw a spike back in 2019, but when we look at holistically, people have just been borrowing more and more money. And so even though we are seeing margin debt pull back a little bit, it doesn't necessarily mean that's something drastic. It doesn't mean we're heading to a bear market. That's not what it means. Because when we look at it holistically, people are still borrowing a ton of money to bet in the markets, to invest, and a little pullback isn't really changing the overall sentiment. And so I think this was a good counterpoint, which haven't seen a lot of people talking about, is yeah, it's pullback, but negative credit balances is larger than ever still, and that hasn't changed. And so I think that's really important. Another important part, and then as Nate mentioned, like consumer sentiment. So something we like to do on the podcast is, you go a lot of places and they talk about one aspect of something. So they'll just talk about margin debt and how margin debt means the market's going to crash. But what we try to do here is put all the points together. So okay, we see margin debt going down, but we're also seeing consumer sentiment hit the lowest since 2013. So here's another negative point in the market. So what we're trying to find is, are there more negatives or more pros in the market? And what does that mean for the market moving forward? So we know that the Fed's, if you're new to investing, you haven't invested that much, markets go up because of liquidity. And liquidity means people are borrowing money at really large rates, like we saw Bitcoin 1 to 100. So if you have $1, you can invest $100 on leverage. And so we're still seeing leverage really high in the markets. We're still seeing the Fed spend enormous amounts of money on QE, both in buying bonds, which helps the markets go higher, as well as mortgage-backed securities, which helps the real estate market prices go higher and keeps demand up. But we're starting to see small kinks in the armor. So we're seeing margin debt slowly come down. We're seeing consumer sentiment hit the low since 2013. So these are the things we're starting to line up. And if you haven't been on our past podcasts, go to the YouTube channel and listen to those, because we talk about things similar to this, putting all those little points together to figure out what's going on. And so these are things that we're paying attention to, that you really need to pay attention to on a month-to-month basis, because the market has moved substantially, and we really want to see how much more true upside could there be in the markets. Is there enough negativity going on, or enough of change of sentiment around borrowing money to invest, or how people feel about consuming? So consumer price index, or this means people are going to spend less money because they're scared. And so all these things have an impact on the economy, which has an impact on the stocks you buy. So these are all the things we try to pay attention to. But I don't know if you have anything else to add on there. I know I went on a little rampage of talking, but anything else?
No, that was great. No, that was great. Because it leads into the next topic that I do want to bring up, which is unemployment as well. We're seeing that tick up again for the first time in a little bit, nationally speaking. In some states like California, we're seeing it hit a little harder. But it's gone up 353. It stood at 353 rather during the week and ended up 4,000 from the prior week. So beautiful graph as always we like to put up. Is my thing loading? That was weird. I got stuck.
I think it's up.
Okay. Is it oh my bad. Sorry,
we're
scrolling on the wrong screen. Thank you. So yeah, we got the graph on both screens here, but just a note, it is slowly ticking up again. In California, it's gone up quite significantly in the last couple of weeks. So obviously the average is going to be higher here in California, but we're seeing this nationally, the same trend. Consumer sentiment, as was just alluded to by Dill, is obviously we're feeling that impact. People don't know if they're going to stay employed and what's going to happen. And the compounding fact is are we going to see this consistently across the states continuing to rise? We have the initial claims of unemployment going up, and then we also have some of the folks we talked about this, 3 weeks ago? The states are starting to cut back from their unemployment programs of providing weekly payments. So there's kind of this confluence right now of unemployment going back up. Governors are cutting the checks, or not cutting checks anymore, rather, they're cutting the cutting of checks to folks. And so you're seeing kind of this brewing of, do people feel comfortable and quite frankly bullish in the market when it comes to the consumerism? Who knows? And this is part of it. And then that leads to another segment that I've talked about a little bit briefly in the past. It's Uber and Lyft and kind of how their formation of business is going, and specifically Prop 22. This is a state proposition here in the state of California. Thank you, Dill, for pulling that up.
Got you.
Very, very important, because this is obviously can significantly, impair the business model that Uber and Lyft have by virtue of what was originally AB 5, which was a state bill back in 2019 that reclassified workers, or specifically put a litmus test, a more stringent testing procedure on whether or not they are a worker, employed worker for a company, or if they're a contractor by trade. And so what Prop 22 ended up doing was fought the AB 5 bill and said, let's look at this in a different reign, because we are specifically focused on contractor positions. We have no intent to hire people, and it's really based on the model that people can work when they want, on demand of employment opportunities. And so we've seen that across, many states are kind of looking at this, even countries are looking at this, but in California, this is really the paradigm that people are looking at, because there's such a high population. We're the 10th biggest economy in the world. So there's a lot of things that we need to be looking at, as this can have profound impacts to folks. And so in particular, there's some stats that I do want to pull up, because I'll loop this back to stocks at some point. But specifically, there's Uber Eats. So apart from driving, there's also the Uber Eats side of it. So Uber hasn't made profits since they began, specifically in the ride-hailing services. What I think could happen is, obviously, they could pivot and go towards Uber Eats. Thank you for pulling up the graph. And so through that, we're looking at here in the States, we have Grubhub, DoorDash, Uber Eats, and Postmates. And you're seeing DoorDash is taking off, and Grubhub is actually dropping, and Uber's somewhere in the middle, trying to figure out how can they make their business model work. And so that, I think, could be the pivotal moment, for them, because the ride-hailing service is obviously very contentious, and there's many laws and policies, and that's something that I look at first when there's an endeavor, either a new foray into business, a blue ocean strategy we'll call it, where there's no competition. You're the first one to get slammed with all the policies and laws and regulations, because you're the first one to go into it. And so they're still trying to recover from all the money that they put in, for example, in the Prop 22, where many of these on-demand services and ride-hailing services like Lyft, Uber, and several others put in over $200 million to lobby for Prop 22 to continue going forward. So strong implications here. As we see with Uber Eats, one of the big ones, items that I'm looking at, it's generated $4.8 billion in revenue, which is a significant number for them. And there's another stat, sorry, I had it somewhere here.
That's all that was how much they pay per order?
Yeah, it's a little over what they pull in. Yeah, $43.
Yeah.
$43.50 to deliver an average order of $40. So they're losing $3.50 per order that they're putting out there. But what I thought was also interesting, just out of my wonky side, is you have Uber here. You would think by having more accessibility and prevalence in certain areas and countries, you would make more. But I looked over here at this Meituan. They're based out of China. They're actually a trade company that has a bunch of items. They're a financial institution, and they're backing certain endeavors such as Meituan. So they're, I think, strictly based out of China. They're one country, and their revenue is $7.2 billion. Where you have Uber has to, their marketing increases. They have to hire staff to deal with the legalese of going into other countries. So the revenue is 4.8, and they're in 45 countries. And so you're seeing kind of a spat of different things happening here simultaneously. Boone, if you have anything, I'm curious.
I have a question for you. Long term, as investments, do you think these are good investments in the long term?
It's a very good question.
Would you buy a DoorDash or Uber stock? do
I think a
seem like
lot of
data
it,
we're seeing.
yeah, and we've seen the ebb and flow. So it's all based on policy at the end of the day here. Because if they win Prop 22, you're going to see an influx of cash going into the company because they made a win. And theoretically, their business model is based on contracting. So if that wins, and that could trickle down obviously to the food distribution, like Uber Eats and some of the other folks. So I am keeping an eye on it just in case. But there's also competition is heavy in this field now that they were on the forefront of this whole thing, and so they paid their dues, so to speak. But then you got people like Didi, who's out of China. I could see them wanting to come to the U.S. and competing, with their own platform. Maybe it's renamed, and somebody else picks up their business model, if you will. But there's just too many regulations that are stymieing the growth of these companies, and ultimately that's what's going to kick us in the arse. And when you have to pay $43.50 to drive an order for that's a $40 order. Like
Yeah.
somehow they're maintaining relevance and investment by virtue of losing money. Like, so for me, I don't see that as an opportunity right now. But if they can jump that hurdle, it's not unsurmountable, but it is going to come at a cost fiscally and time, quite frankly. So, but along those lines. Because there's another thing, there's survey data that came out, which is pretty interesting considering the impositions here that the government's trying to do or intervene on the private market. And 77% of Lyft drivers, to be noted, indicated that they had health coverage from another source, and 94% are driving less than 20 hours a week, so making Lyft a part-time job. So part of the debate here from Prop 22 position is saying these people deserve health care, these people deserve other rights. However, when 94% of them are driving part-time, now you're also driving up the costs.
Like a weekend job.
Yeah, it's a weekend hustle. Maybe it's like people have kids. Women are disproportionately working these jobs because they are typically the caretaker at home. My family, we've split it 50-50, but we're not every family. So for us, it's how we as a community, as employees, if you will, or contractors rather, that's the beauty of this opportunity here. Because once you become an employee, there's employment taxes, there's health insurance, there's all these other rules and regulations that add to the cost. So that $40 order doesn't go down from $35.50. It actually probably goes to $45 or more because you have to cover the overhead. So then this business model does not become feasible. So the pivotal moment here to your question, going back to it, Dill, is Prop 22. This is really the watershed moment. If they can continue by adopting or enabling Prop 22 to remain, that's what's going to make this company successful. If not,
That increases their profits, right?
yeah, it constitutes people as being contractors as opposed to employees. So the legal implications of this is heavy. You have the union side, rightfully so. They want folks to be employed, but also when they surveyed folks, they said, we don't care about being fully employed or for the benefits. We just like the mere fact that we have an opportunity to work when we want on demand. We can clock in and clock out at our will. And so it's interesting. SEIU and some of the other hardcore labor folks are heavily ingrained in this. It gives them a reason to fight. I'm about employee rights, but these aren't employees. So we got to think about it that way. But yeah, Uber and Lyft, they've never been profitable. I think by going the food route, they could be. However, there's also some legal items that they have to work out with that as well, in terms of how much are they charging, what are their fee rates, etc., to make it work. But Lyft lost $1.8 billion in 2020 and 2.6 in the year prior, and they finally have reached some sort of profitability through EBITDA. But you can kind of fudge those books a little bit to make it look like you made some money. But even then, Uber loses $4 billion a year, man. Like,
I think what's interesting on the food side thing is, so Uber and such, they should have had their best year ever in 2020, right? Like, that should have been the peak part of their business, as nobody could eat in restaurants, nobody could go in person, and that should have been your best year ever, and you should have your best margins, had your best growth. And when you have to think about it, we're heading back into a period where people are going back into restaurants. And I think what we're seeing is that in the U.S. economy, people love to eat out in person.
Yeah.
I think we can compare that to other economies. Like, even the U.S., even we compare, like, this is a separate topic, but as a counterpoint, like, e-commerce is way smaller in the U.S. than it is in China, and it's
Mm.
because the consumer is different. And I still think we have a substantial amount of years until eating out at restaurants is not as big of a thing as it is today.
Mm.
And I think, like, if I think about these businesses, is they have such small profit margins, and like they're just making. Someone makes was canceled for that's wild. Um, but like if someone
Yeah.
someone makes a $50 order, how much money are they making on that $50 order? Maybe like $5 or something. 10% maybe on
Yeah.
that order, if not less. And when I think about it, is at least consumer. I think when it comes to higher priced, 'cause I think they did have a pretty high average order value on there. But
Mm-hmm.
when I think about eating out, like I don't think most, and I could be wrong because I don't know all the data, but I assume that people like to eat out in nicer restaurants in person. Average user spend, but what is that? Is that per order? Or it said $200
That's
per
average.
China?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the average user spend.
I think it's like
There's a better
lifetime value
number.
or something
Yeah, there's a
per
better
year.
number here.
But like
I'll
when I
find
think
it.
about, no one's gonna order Uber Eats for a steak dinner,
Yeah, you're not.
And when I think about Uber and all these companies do the food delivery, the way they make more money is when orders are larger. And I think most people don't order expensive food through Uber Eats. It's fast food. It's maybe McDonald's or maybe your local burger joint or something like that. And so when I think about it, as the economy opens up, people love to eat out. That means their average order values are going to come down, which means their revenue comes down, which means their profit
Mm-hmm.
margins are smaller or negative. And
Yeah,
so in the short term, I don't see a lot of positive for these companies on the food delivery side of things. I think in the
that's tough.
long term, when we have automated vehicles and they don't need drivers anymore, and they'll have a real, much larger profit margins, I could see that being a thing. But that's so far down the line. But in the
Yeah, they
short
got to
term,
get
I
through the
think there's a lot of
regulatory
headwind.
hoops.
Yeah,
100%. 100%. There's too much headwind that they're going through right now
yeah,
to make it profitable. I'm actually curious why people are still putting money into this.
yeah.
Year over year, they're fundraising and making it
They're
happen.
still
But
losing money.
it's interesting. I mean, they've been here a while. On the flip side, Travis Kalanick, what was his last name?
Sure.
Whatever. Travis, the founder of Uber, he's actually opening
Uh,
up a ghost kitchen
oh yeah,
in
you're telling me about that.
San Jose, like in downtown. So it's pretty interesting. Uh,
Smart.
hey, what up, Jake? It's all
Hey,
good,
Jake,
man.
coming by, man.
But exactly to your
Oh,
point, the revenue did get bumped, but the trajectory they have here it's insane to say. They went from 1.9 to 4.8. I could see that coming right down. The
yeah.
following year, being cut in
It'll
half or
come back
whatever.
down to like 2.5 or 3 or something maybe this year.
Yeah. And DoorDash has taken predominantly most of the market share anyway. At this point, I think they're at 45% or
Yeah,
something.
Dash has definitely
Um,
moved ahead of them.
but yeah, where are they at? 56 at this point. For Uber in the U.S., all the competitors are right here on the right side of the screen, King. So Postmates actually, weren't they bought by Uber Eats? DoorDash and Grubhub. So you
Yeah, I
have
think so.
Uber's still number there or some here. Yeah, DoorDash is surpassing. They've got the business model down. In fact, they got a little hard to hear chill deal. Let me boost them up. Sorry about that. Sounds good on my side. All right. But yeah, so
My
DoorDash
mic no closer.
and DoorDash has a couple different revenue sources coming into play. They just, I won't say where, but they just pulled a permit to do a storefront in a city and in a metro city.
Smart.
And so, yeah, they want on-demand goods to be readily available to folks. Kind of like a warehouse where they're going to store everything, but they'll have a walk-up counter. But it's predominantly a distribution center in a downtown. So ideally, if people want milk like this, and they, Safeway charges $10 because we just placed an order today to deliver, $10 to deliver, how much ever your order is doesn't make sense, and a lot of people, the average rate, I know Target does it for $10. That's kind of the going number. I think like DoorDash and some of these other folks can do it at half the cost, maybe, $6-7. As
Yeah.
well. But I know that's also been the problem for the drivers is the tip originally was actually going to DoorDash and some of these other folks. But in the food delivery in particular, they were a couple different cities in California now, like the state, like we were talking Prop 22. But from the food delivery side, there's an imposition from local governments that were saying you need to cap how much you're charging the restaurants. So instead of going 20-30%, you can only do 15%. So what does capitalism do? They get creative. And DoorDash said, you know what? Fine, then we'll do that. But we're going to now implement a flat fee of $1 or $2 per order to cover for that cost. So regardless,
Yeah.
they're going to get what they need because you have to cover the basis. And if people don't want it, don't order it. Like, and this is where I get a little frustrated with government. Trying to do the right thing has ramifications and consequences if they don't think it through sometimes. And business is business. I mean, they're here to make money. They're here to employ people. And whether they're employees or contractors, that's what makes the world go round at the end of the day. So I know you pulled up a chart. Thank you.
Yeah, DoorDash is definitely looking much more healthy of a chart than Uber. Uber's chart looks a lot worse. But I think DoorDash is going to have a hard time getting over $195 a share. So
Yeah, it's not looking too pretty.
Technically speaking, it's going to be challenging for them. Just
Get some
based
pretty
on their
hardcore
technical chart
consolidation
reading.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see them going sideways a while, and I think that's partially just due to their valuation. I mean, they grew a lot this last year. Let me bring up my other screen. They grew a lot this last year, but their valuation is $63 billion. They're not EBITDA positive yet. They don't make money. They don't have any net income, and their yearly revenue is probably about $4 billion right now. So they're 12 times revenue and their valuation, which is a little hot. And they're not EBITDA positive yet. And so and they don't have a ton of cash. Like $4 billion is not a whole lot of money for a business really running through that much cash. And so, yeah, I think definitely going sideways is probably more realistic for this company because their valuation is so high. So, but Dash definitely looks better than Uber when I look at the charts. But, yep, just wanted to cover that technical part. Get back to the stocks.
No, I appreciate that. That's good because actually there is a company that I've been looking at, and feel free to pull it up, MPNGF, and that is the China company that I was just talking about that's dominating. They have one country.
MPNGF?
Yeah, you could type in these folks.
OTC?
Yeah. They're ADR OTC, I think. Yeah. But they're pretty interesting. So they're a financial holding company, but they are pushing heavily on this world of it. I'm curious to see, and I'd love your input on this, and you too, King. The static came back. What's static?
I think there's something in the mic, but I don't know if that's...
Is it mine? Because I have my fan blowing in my face. But
keeping that up.
I'd be curious to see, because of China and the stocks, all the snafu that's happening right now. I'd be curious to see what happens with them from a technical standpoint as well. But I mean, their revenue, they're at $7 billion right now. And I don't know if they have a chance to grow more. I haven't really looked into their business model and how they're doing it, but
only red flag I'm saying, I don't know what happened, but for some reason last year they were EBITDA positive, making about $2 billion.
Yep.
But their negative net income the last 2 quarters. So their revenues doubled, but their net income went down. So I think we need to look into why. Because if that's going to reverse and they're going to go, their revenue's up 122% year over year, which is insane. Being a $30 billion company in terms of revenue in 1 quarter, but their negative net income. So if we see a reversal in their net income, honestly, this could be a nice pickup. So that's something I'll be looking at is net income. See how that reverses.
Yep.
But if they keep losing 4 billion a quarter, then they're going to have to raise cash soon because they only have 17 billion. So
Yeah.
that's a year worth of cash on hand. If
That's
they keep
some
losing
burn
money.
going on. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why they're burning that much. That's the only thing on that side I think we should do some more DD on.
Yep.
On a technical standpoint, China's still in a rough spot. I've made a few videos on my channel, but I'm pretty bullish China long term. I think they're
Yep.
going
100%.
through some growing pains at the moment, which I don't think will last long term. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the CCP and how they do things. It's really not that much different than the U.S. I know I'm going to get blasted for that, but they can just make decisions much quicker than we can in the U.S.
Exactly.
We have a pretty left swinging government for the most part, and it takes them years to do things. So like, I'm gonna go on a tangent real quick, but like in China, so they're making this regulation like the day of because the CCP can make those decisions. But in the U.S., when they're trying to break up, like the U.S. government is trying to break up Facebook and Instagram. They've been trying to do
Yeah.
it for years, and eventually they'll be able to do it. But the CCP can do it in a week, where it'll take the U.S. government 5 or 6 years to do it. And so there's, in some ways, it's not that much different. But the cons of this chart is definitely a head and shoulders pattern, technically speaking. So that's not great. And we did break down from that.
It looks like King's Octopus. Anyway, keep going.
That's true. RSI still below 50, which is bearish. You see MACD turning up a little bit. Let's see if they're under the 20 EMA.
So they had an antitrust. They have a antitrust thing going on.
That's probably what
At the beginning of the month. Yeah. At the beginning of the month. $1 billion.
If they can make it through that, then this is an interesting stock to keep your eye on, actually. I'm going to be keeping my eye on this. If it does pull back substantially more.
Yep.
Because there are some red flags right now, but I'll be keeping my eye on this one. It's a good call out. Good call out, Nate.
Cool. Yeah, I'm just pulling up the $1 billion fine, antitrust, and these are all prevalent anyway. I think exactly to your point, you have antitrust kicking off pretty hard, where you got Google, Apple, yeah, all the players are kind of like pointing fingers at everybody else, and so we'll see how it all shakes out. We were just talking in Discord actually about HBO spinning off of AT&T. That was more of a strategic play than it was like antitrust, but nonetheless, it's all one of the same. At the end of the day, they're probably covering their tails pretty hard. But yeah, I don't know if you saw about Alibaba because we talked a little bit about that, and I know you're bullish long term on Baba.
Long term, yeah.
Because I know they just got whacked as well, Tencent and a few others on some stuff.
Like
but
4 billion or something. I can't remember what their fine was. It was a crazy number.
Yeah, quite heavily. But yeah, market cap. I'm definitely paying attention to them as well. I've been keeping them on my radar, kind of low for a little bit. But apart from that, my browser's kind of like being dumb. 1 sec. I'm gonna close it and try to open it back up.
Any stocks you guys in the chat looking at? Curious what you guys are bullish on right now while we come to our next topic.
Let us know. I said I had like 30 tabs open on that one. That wasn't right.
I got one more topic if we want to cover it.
Yeah.
Just about market cycles.
Yeah. I was gonna hit a little hard on government again, as well with climate change and some of the stuff that's happening. But yeah, it's good.
You can
My
if you want.
My browser finally restarted. It's just more about tax impositions and the carbon border adjustment tax, and kind of thinking about China going down that road one last time.
Yeah, go for it.
If you want, and I'd be curious to hear what y'all think in chat as well. But let's see if this even pops up. But a great New York Times article just came out and talking about how they're trying to figure out how to pay for Biden's big infrastructure package. And so they're talking about senators introducing a plan on Monday. This was last Monday. To tax iron, steel, and other imports from countries who are not abiding by the current or future abatement opportunities for climate. And so, well, let me see the full article. Beautiful. One of the few
I
times.
couldn't get mine up. I was trying to get it up for you.
Thank you. But yeah, hardcore tax that is going to be put on other countries, and specifically when we're importing, which obviously can increase costs and a bunch of other stuff. But this is definitely something that they're looking at, 3.5 trillion rather, budget resolution of how they're going to start to pay for it. And so they're looking at bringing in, I believe, 5 billion to 16 billion annually by virtue of doing this. And so they're thinking 12% of the imports that are coming through with the tariff starting in 2024 would cover the petroleum, natural gas, coal, as well as a larger footprint like aluminum, steel, and iron and cement, which, if you want to think about it this way, would put the impetus into the American companies who could do it, quote unquote, cheaper by virtue of this cap or this tax being imposed on our imports, specifically from other countries. So I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, because it could go a little beyond that as well. And I was thinking about our import crisis, if you will, of chips, computers, all of the things that make our world go around here. And if we're going to be doing this, and it could extend to other goods, are we putting ourselves at a detriment, potentially, a disservice by virtue of? I mean, what do you think?
A disservice by doing things internally?
Well, increasing the costs potentially by slamming countries with an import tax because they're not qualifying themselves with the carbon tax. With the carbon laws, if you will, that are being implemented throughout other countries. And I know some other places are also looking at this as well, of imposing certain import and or restrictions on other countries who are not playing game, kind of like the Paris Agreement and some of the other climate goals throughout the world, for that matter. So I see pros and cons to this. I'm a little worried that if we start imposing such tax structures and fees on these countries, that it could have negative impacts, i.e., do we even have enough material to do what we want and need for the infrastructure, billions of dollars, trillions for that matter, going into cement, steel, all the things that literally build the infrastructure of our country? Do we have enough of raw material, B, the labor, right, and then C, the cost to employ all of these folks to do that? Because what we import from our other countries, i.e. China, we get a kind of a discount by virtue of them.
Big discount.
Yeah, economies of scale, right? And so it's like,
discount.
There's a reason why we don't do certain things in this country.
Yep.
And so does this put us a little behind if we decide to go this route? Do you think other countries will play ball, like those who may or may not be going towards these climate change goals as we're moving forward? But they did talk about poor countries not having to pay the tariff, but even then, I'm curious to know your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, this is very like geopolitical issue as well. Like,
yeah.
I think what a lot of people don't realize is, I think there's a sentiment that the U.S. is dependent on China, which to a degree, but I think what you really have to realize is China is really dependent on everybody else. And I say that because when you're an export country like China is, if people don't import your exports, then your economy shrinks significantly. And so if China's like, no, like, we're not going to do that, we don't care about your tax, then the U.S. is just going to go somewhere else. And so when these taxes first came into play when Trump was in office, the reason China was let it slide is because they are dependent on the U.S. buying goods from them, goods and raw materials and such. And so, but I think it goes back to our point about when the government tries to interfere on the free market, right? Like, I think, in my opinion, in the short term, it's going to cause a lot of disarray. Yeah. Like, we're already seeing costs across the board go up substantially, and it's only going to push those up higher. In the long term, all countries are going to get on this eco wave. Not all of them are yet, but in the long term, everybody will, because that's just how the world works, by
Yeah.
pressure mostly. Like international pressure, and like if you're not going to play by the rules that we set, then we're not going to put you in our gang and give you the benefits of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the short term, it could definitely have a lot of issues, and I don't think it makes sense to start producing some things in the U.S. I think that would be. I know you kind of talk about that. I think that'd be a really big detriment. I think, and this kind of is with same thing with COVID. Like,
Mm.
I don't think small businesses should ever be shut down, but what the what the what the Fed did by stimulating the economy with all of buying tons of things is they create a lot of zombie companies. So companies that increase their debts even further, and in the free market they shouldn't exist.
Mm.
And so I think when a hand is put in, um, or bringing it back to my last point is the U.S. has moved away from a material producing economy because we moved towards technologies, and technologies are typically um, we make more money for them. So China as a country produces raw goods, even though they're also moving to technology. Is you take a raw good and you make it into a computer, and a computer you can sell it for much more money, and so your GDP as a country goes up. And so I think it's kind of going backwards
Mm.
if we start to try to bring some of the things back into the U.S. because what it does is, we call it the steel belt,
Yeah.
um, and like the Detroit's kind of that Midwest. Like instead of trying to bring those industries back, why don't we start to bring in more innovative industries into those states and
Yeah. The
that part
Rust
of the
Belt.
country, the
Yeah.
Rust Belt. That's the word,
Yeah.
the Rust Belt. And there are things starting to happen, but I think to that degree, I think it would be really detrimental to try to be like we're going to produce steel ourselves or we're going to produce this ourselves. I think that would have more long-term detriment than positivity.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
and people are just going to have to play by, like if we put a tax on something, China's just going to have to absorb it, because they're dependent on countries. So
Right.
I
And I
mean,
think to your point, economies of scale, like people who adopt this are going to implement it, and then China's going to get squeezed, if you will, and
mm-hmm.
forced to play if they
Yep,
want to remain. Yeah, that's fair.
exactly.
And then, yeah, from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt, Southwest here in Cali, we have cap and trade and some other tools. There's 13 other states that just highlighted this paragraph, but essentially you could trade your offset of your pollution. You can buy clean energy in lieu of implementing that into your process. So there are other tools and techniques used to kind of get around it, however costly. But talking about that, and not to pound on the government too heavy, but kind of to your point, once government starts intervening a little bit, I thought this was kind of fascinating because, like you said, these zombie companies are existing, and then we're imposing certain regulations on folks. Is this helping business or is it not? So either we're bolstering the bag of businesses by inflating their purses with money that we print and keeping them sustaining. They may or may not, should or should not exist. But then also, what up, Charge, is looking at
Charge.
COVID in particular and making. I got mixed feelings about this, but they're looking at requiring some local jurisdictions already doing this, and specifically in public areas. But COVID-19 in particular in California as a state is looking to mandate that people start getting the vaccination if they want to participate and go to places either public and or private at this point. So I know we have a lot of issues with like our schools, for example. A lot of kids are now getting sick, but I just thought it's all kind of fascinating in the grand scheme of things, just because, nice article, by the way, as we're looking at California as a whole. We were talking about tech a little bit, now we're talking about COVID, talking about imports at the global scale, macro economy, but pray tell, what's your chart? I like it. What are you looking at?
I just pulled an article about zombie companies sustained by COVID-19 support. And it's just doing some I haven't looked. I just brought this up, so I'm not too sure what it says.
Hmm.
But see if I can find.
There's a
some
nice
data
paragraph.
here.
Go up one more paragraph. Credit subsidies have protected companies from COVID-related insolvency. Both companies and viable business models, not viable firms. Yeah. Okay, so there's a good definition to start off.
Yeah, we were talking about it, so might as well define what we're talking about.
That's good. But yeah, government impetus can help or harm, I think. And so specifically, as you're kind of reading through that, the Times obtained a draft of AB 455, which is going to be the assembly bill here in the state, that they want to look at. The version calls for anyone entering a bar, restaurant, gym, hotel, event center, or sports arena to show proof that he or she is fully vaccinated. So now, once again, what becomes public versus private? At what point does government intervention work or not work? I think in this scenario, it's healthy. You know, I wouldn't say I'm anti-government by any means, but I think there's definitely scenarios where they need to step aside as a public agency and regarding health. I think this is a healthy, viable option for them to interject and say, hey, we need to protect the public because apparently you people can't do it yourself. I think it's timely. But anybody have thoughts on that? Please drop a comment if you're on YouTube watching this. Very curious to hear your thoughts. These are all interesting things happening as we speak. And as y'all know, we're predominantly Democrats here in California, so it'd only be right that we put this forward here. But yeah, interesting to see the labor unions kind of involved here. But also businesses would have to actually, I wouldn't say front the cost, but allow folks to take 24-hour sick leave. Yeah, there you go. To go get vaccinated if needed. And theoretically, it would be free. So, but enforcement is always of concern too. We think about this in many different cities where who enforces it at this point. You know, do you pull in the state folks? Usually it's going to be county health and enforcement officers and some other people. But I don't know. That's also additional money and resources that need to be dispersed to other cities and counties to make that happen. Because who checks for, do you have to hire somebody? What if you're a small business of 10 staff? You have to hire an additional person just to check for these cards, or you have to add it as a requirement now for your host or whoever. But anyway, I digress. Government's great. I don't have any bones to pick. Just thought it was interesting as we're moving through this.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But really quick, because we were talking a little bit about climate change. There's this really great, like CNBC rather, tweet on Twitter that talked about the constraints of supply due to the fires and storms and everything that are happening and droughts. And the constraints on supply, lumber might be coming back up, I think, in price due to the fires. We have massive fires. In fact, I'm breathing like 130 AQI air in California right now, and it's freaking hot right now. Coffee could be doubling, or it has doubled. The futures, we saw that kind of peak. It doubled because of droughts. And then kind of a random fact of the day, 2/3 of all sushi rice is grown in California. And now that we have wildfires and drought happening simultaneously, that's going to hurt.
No more sushi, Californians.
Yeah. So then there's discussion about, well, do we need to oversupply or import some items, and then where do we store those goods? Obviously, some of it's perishable, so you can't store it all forever. But rice, for example, if we can't grow it, who's going to grow it? Where do we import it? Because it's not just avocado toast, right? We need our sushi too.
Avocado toast and sushi. The California.
That's when you know you made it. Yeah.
No one's ever said it better. That's
I digress.
The way to describe a Californian. Well done.
But REITs, I'm looking at warehouses. REITs, I've been looking at them for a while now for logistics and some other things.
Any specific ones?
I've talked about them before. I'd have to go back and see how they're doing. I don't want to miscalculate or misspeak, so I'm not going to say anything for the moment until I go back and do my due diligence. But we'll post it up in Talk Game Discord here this week.
I could bring up some charts if you want me to.
Let me see.
Just curious. We'll end kind of the last part of the stream with just some stocks that we're looking at. So, one thing we talked about in the Discord, I think King brought it up, was AT&T and how he likes HBO. But then I mentioned in the stream or in the Discord that AT&T is actually selling off, or not selling off, but AT&T stock is going to be separate from HBO. So that was also a reason I liked AT&T stock originally, was because HBO. But now HBO is going to be merging with Discovery, which is really interesting. So Discovery and HBO will now be the same online platform for streaming, which I think is a really good duo, because I actually really like Discovery type shows because I like HGTV stuff. It's my guilty pleasure. But I think you have a really strong base of people who like that kind of content that are going to continue to pay for that. Like 100%. I don't pay for it yet. I've been very tempted to buy it lately. But then HBO, I think HBO has, I think, the best content out of every platform, in my opinion. I think they put out the best shows and movies.
Yeah.
And it's really different than some platforms. HBO puts all their new movies on HBO directly, and you don't have to pay addition for it. So there's people signing up because they want to watch the newest like Wonder Woman, or the newest movie that comes out under the HBO umbrella of studios. So I think the combination of Discovery and HBO is a little underlooked. The only issue is they have a ton of debt. So AT&T has a ridiculous amount of debt, and some of that debt is following HBO on the split. And so that's the only big negative, is their large debt. But they are growing a lot as a business. Both of those streaming services are really taking off. And I think they're the type of businesses that are going to take a lot of market share away from a Netflix. So I think Netflix content is getting really bad. Personally, I think they can't keep up with the demand. They can't put out enough content, and at this point enough good content to keep up with all the demand that's going on to their platform. But here's a couple stats about Discovery quickly on the financial side of things. So PE ratio 13. I think if we look forward on that, it's a little bit lower. I think I spelled this wrong, didn't I? BinViz. Hope I don't go to a weird site. You type in something wrong and then you're like, uh-oh. So forward moving PE ratio of 8, which is pretty good. Last year at least, 11 billion sales, 1 billion income. So one of the things, now that they're moving everything digital, in a couple years, I would say their net income is going to increase, because they're not having to go through the same mechanisms that cost more money. Like putting your movie in a theater is actually really expensive. Everything just to online can cut a lot of your costs, and so I think their profit margins are going to increase over the next couple of years as well. So Discovery is honestly a stock I'm keeping my eye on. I've been trying to look for stocks that are a little less growth focused, and maybe are a little more conservative or less risky. And Discovery is one of them on my end.
Nice.
How about you, Nate? Any stocks you're looking at right now?
Yeah, I got a couple. Pop one up right now, and I'll have to see what's in my portfolio. I've been actively inactive a little bit outside of in the REIT world. I've held on to some for quite a while, but Duke was one that came up that I've been paying attention to. They do have dividends. Short interest isn't too high, but this is a medical and industrial REIT. So predominantly looking at
Very strong.
Yeah, and I've kept my eye on them for the last couple months, specifically because when we're thinking about obviously medical being COVID, but secondarily to that, the industrial of warehousing and light industrial. So where storing goods, but then also activating spaces with either tech or warehousing to store goods, like an Amazon type business that might be popping up or whatever it may be. So that was one that I've been keeping an eye on. For a couple different reasons. I bought a few options on these long leaps, those long option holds, out like a year, I believe. So that's one that I've been looking at. I might wait for a pullback. Thank you for charting that before I look to grab any more here. But
Yeah, it looks like it bounced off a really long-term trend line back in 2011, recently around here. It hit support as well.
Yep.
Here, and move back up. And so if it breaks this high, it can definitely spring higher here. So anybody in the stream, really look for this high because it couldn't break out before, but as the market's showing some strength right now, if this thing continues to break out and breaks this all-time high, you can definitely get a little squeeze higher off of that break.
Yeah, and I'm kind of long on them for now. We'll see how the future prevails, but definitely on my list. And then the other one, similar industrial, it's East Group Properties. They do very similar. It's industrial focused, predominantly trust, acquisition, and operation of industrial properties. So that's another one that I've been paying attention to. And then actually they have Prologis down here. That's also another one that I've been looking at as well. So there's a few. That's predominantly what I've been keeping my eye on as we're moving forward through the COVID chaos. Just because there's on demand. I think warehousing is going to remain stably increasing. Yeah, look, Vail. Oh, don't get me started on that one. What you thinking there? Because
I don't know. Iron ore got destroyed because of all the China stuff. I can't remember what the China said about iron ore. They did something. They like capped, or they opened up production, or they capped production, or something, which is why this tanked. China's really is the main factor why a lot of raw materials, like aluminum and stuff, have pulled back because China put out some crazy stipulations around it. So I don't know. I'm still keeping an eye on Vail. I'm a little worried about raw materials right now. Across the board. I was gonna buy some Aleph AA. Which I should have bought.
We talked about that.
Dip.
Yeah.
I missed that dip bad. And
that was a good dip too. You called it.
I didn't expect this to jump up so quickly.
Yeah, you've been talking about AA for a couple weeks at least now. Yeah.
So I don't know about raw materials right now. I'm feeling a little. I feel like there's a lot of risk with raw materials.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's also going to be
in terms of prices coming down, and in turn these stocks would go down as well.
Right.
So, but I don't know. They're still on my watch list. This did, bounce off a pretty big support level, which is bullish. So we'll see what happens next. I think.
Yeah,
I think those are the main ones I'm looking at.
Yeah, I'm trying to see if there's anything else I grabbed.
How about anybody in the chat? Anybody in the chat? Stocks that you guys have.
Actually bought a put option on Ford that executed on my Robinhood account. Totally forgot about it.
Ford pushed off of the news that they launched about the truck. They had some positivity off that bounce. And I'm not gonna I don't want to gloat too much because but I'm going to. I made 4 or 5 videos on Ford, and I told people that 1330 was not the bottom. I've told you that it was going to somewhere around $12. We'll see if that was the bottom. We'll find out. Who knows? We'll know pretty soon if there's more downside. I getting a little worried about Ford with all the shortages, because GM said they're cutting a bunch of production on vehicles, which is
they're
to
going to a
help
more
save,
on demand.
Yeah, to help save some costs. But I think that's also a red flag that, one, demand is slowing down, and two, they still have a lot of cars built, and
Inventory.
cutting demand also tells us that the issue of chips is not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
So there's a couple big threats to car companies right now. And with growth slowing down and consumer sentiment going low, consumer discretionaries, which is like cars and such, it's getting a little dicey with them. But you never know. We could just be going through like a little slowdown and the consumer picks back up.
Yeah.
The next couple months will tell us a lot of, once the data comes out, will let us know a lot about how the consumer's feeling.
Well, they're only shorted 1.86%, so that's a decent sign.
Yeah, no one's shorting Ford. That'd be silly. You don't get much reward for shorting Ford.
Mm-hmm.
But
there's a pretty
massive
sell-off. Interesting.
Yeah.
Institutional. Yeah, I think that covers a lot.
We covered some
follow up.
macro stuff today. We did
Yeah,
macro
I'll follow up on the LLK. Wait, which one?
LLKKF.
Yeah.
LLKKF. When is that? Is that in October? Is when it those options? We get those options.
Monday. It should be hitting our.
Monday.
Yeah, it executed on Friday, on the 27th. So I was checking my book, man. I was like, where's my stocks? Friday, issue of bonus options and dispatch of new holding statement, Friday, August 27th. So they should be somewhere anytime soon. I didn't see them in my portfolio, but
Not mine yet either.
and I don't think they merged into my current shares because that would be weird.
Yeah, I don't think.
Not accurate.
For me.
But Coinbase, where's they at? Coinbase? No. ADA, really quick. Anybody doing ADA? Some Cardona? Where's it going?
Where are they at now? They have 4.3 still, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, they hit 320. Wow, I didn't see that push to 320. $320.
To 75. When it hit 320? Like 297.
Yeah, it popped quickly to 320,
Oh, interesting.
and then just came back down. I think it was just a quick pop.
Yeah. But we'll see if that one goes up.
Yeah, it'd be crazy if it moves more.
Hmm.
I don't know who's buying this thing. There must be like a ton of money pumping into this, because there's so many tokens of Cardona.
A 24-hour trading volume of 5 billion? Is that 5 billion or trillion?
I don't know. They have so many tokens.
Million,
They
billion. Yeah.
Let me see how many tokens they have. I don't know off the top of my head.
5.2 billion in the last 24 hours of money. $5.2 billion worth of transactions in 24 hours. What the?
Let me
That's
see what
crazy.
Cardona has. They have 32 billion Cardonas in circulation, which is crazy.
Yep. With a max supply of 45.
Yeah, that's crazy though. Like, there's no companies that have close to that many. Like, that's very few companies have 32 billion shares. So you have to have an insane amount of volume to move this thing, and you have a lot of people buying Cardona. So I don't know who the heck is buying Cardona.
Yeah, you have $5 billion worth of USD going in the last 24 hours. That's crazy.
It must be a lot of leverage, honestly. It must be a ton of leverage. Because if I remember correctly, like 70% of Cardona is held by retail investors.
70?
Or like 70 to 80%.
Wow.
So institutions aren't really in that compared to like a Bitcoin or something.
So on that note, do you think Robinhood's going to go up or down in the near future, considering I wouldn't say a majority. Yeah, I wouldn't say a majority, but was it?
These fools are
It was
coming
under.
out, bro.
Yeah, what was the revenue stream? Was a lot of it was from Dogecoin,
Yeah,
right?
these fools are
Transactions
coming
and stuff.
down,
Right,
down, down, down. I'm super bearish on Robinhood in the short term. Their valuation is wildly insane.
Insane in the membrane.
I don't know who the heck is paying that much for Robinhood. It's a meme stock at this point. I don't know.
It is what it is.
Good place to stop it. Covered a lot of good stuff today.
I agree. I agree.
Found topics. Gave you guys some stock thoughts and ideas to keep an eye on. I hope you guys bought Cardona because
I did a while
we've been
back.
talking about Cardona since like February.
Mm-hmm.
And
At least.
I told you guys.
You and I've been
that
talking about it
dip,
before. Yeah.
That dollar dip. We first talked about it when it was at $1. It ran up to $2, came back down to $1. Still really bullish on it, and still am long term. So
That's a
hope you guys
long-term
bought
play.
some. You're good, Rice.
Good Rice. Oh,
You
that was
did,
loud.
buddy.
Sorry for blowing out eardrums.
We're gonna.
We can rock some fort, Rice, if
We're
you're
gonna
on.
Be gaming. We're gonna be.
Tan
gaming
Man wants in.
tonight.
Yeah. But I should have bought it when it was near dark.
I
Nobody
mean,
could
we've been
predict it,
telling
man.
y'all. Yeah, no one can predict it. Unless you watch my YouTube videos, then you can predict it. Because in my YouTube video, I said
It's a great pitch.
I put a chart that if it breaks above this descending triangle, it's gonna explode, and it did. So, quick plug. Watch my YouTube videos.
I
You'll be
dig it.
making a lot of money.
I dig it.
But yeah, I think that's a great place to stop it. We really appreciate you guys for coming by the podcast, our live podcast. That's what we're calling to make it feel more legit and official.
The real deal.
If you have friends that you think should be interested in these topics, these ideas, please share it with them and let us know. I think what we really is important to us to make sure the content is important to you guys.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's topics that we like to talk about, but we also want it to be beneficial for y'all. So please, in the Discord, let us know what topics you like and don't like. You can either message Nate or I personally, or leave it somewhere in one of the chats, one of the channels. But yeah, we appreciate you guys. You guys are rocking with us and been rocking with us for the last 6 months. So we appreciate you guys. Thanks for always coming by. We'll still be here every Saturday, talking stocks and gaming with you guys. And just as a reminder, this is where we game.
You win. Thank you all for hanging out. Talk soon.